Hey, everybody. We are having more conversations about the Lawyer Forward virtual conference and shifting into this moment. I've been told more than once to stop saying new normal. Apparently, that's not cool to say anymore. And you can't say things like these are strange times and all this. So I don't know if you still call it strange, if it's true of everybody. I don't know what these rules are. But I'm sorry. These are strange times. There's a new normal. Get over it, kids. And we're going to talk about, sort of how we adjust to that, what we can do. What I've done with all these conversations is bring in people that are attacking it at sort of different angles and trying to learn from what they did before, not knowing this crap was coming, and then, how it adapts to the new situation. And so Chris, who was with me, he has a small, he's in a rural area. Yeah, Chris, do we still call it a small? Last I heard, small firm is like less than 500 lawyers or something, which is like everybody.
We're small.
So technically, I think you're in the broad category of small. I think do you guys have 4 lawyers? Is that right?
6, including myself, if
Okay.
you want to lump me into that pile.
Which no one does, because apparently you're not doing much of the actual law work.
Nope.
So I'm letting in some sunlight because it's sunny.
Got to catch it while you can.
In Kansas. So I wanted to talk, and your session was really cool because we talked through how you've built scaling a rural practice is such an unusual thing, and I make reference in the book over and over again to figuring out a rural practice because it's like the easiest kind to get stuck in the churn. It's the easiest kind of practice to do the wrong way, just chasing cases, right? Like you're just
Right.
constant grind of chasing cases. So I didn't want to, I like your perspective for that reason. So we're going to talk through some of it, but I'll send people over to the session. If you go to lawyerforward.com/virtual, if you haven't signed up yet, go watch the session. It's really interesting because we're going to go next level with our conversation a little bit. And I also want to tell everybody, you can put in the comments below questions about when we're going to talk a lot about when to hire, who to hire, how to grow that way, how to grow revenues, debates about adding practice areas, things like that, how to think through that. So a lot of the stuff that Chris has dealt with, you can ask questions and add comments about what you've done below, and we'll address that. So please do that. So Chris, without doing the whole where do you come from? Where did you go? Cotton Eye Joe?
That's right.
I wanted to sort of get into your. This is so nerdy. I wanted to get into your org chart, Chris. Your org chart really mattered to me because anytime I talk to people about stuff in the book that if you want to be a certain kind of lawyer, not the expert freelancer, you're sort of you're trying to build your own personal brand, but you're trying to build a thing, right? You're trying to grow and scale a thing and make decisions and manage staff and all this stuff. If you want to be that kind of lawyer, which is a certain kind of lawyer, a lot of the questions that follow are, well, I can't afford to hire somebody, right?
Sure.
I can't. So real quick, what I'm going to do, Chris, is while you tell me a bit about how your firm is structured, just sort of an overview, I'm going to add links below in this conversation to a couple of places where I talk about the book, like what the book is about, so that if you guys want to go back and get that background, then you can see what Chris is doing as an application of some of the principles in that book. So, Chris, tell me just briefly about how your firm is structured right now.
It's a little bit unique because I think, as I said in the session earlier, as of the beginning of this year, I'm the sole equity owner of the firm. I had founded it with my father, who is our senior legal litigation practitioner and still is. But it is right now me at the very top or very bottom, depending on how you invert the pyramid. And then you have my ops team and you have my practitioners. And they are co-equal in responsibilities because my practitioners are largely responsible for 2 things: practice and practice development. My ops team is largely responsible for the business. And so you could branch those into 2 separate trees, but they interact and collaborate so much across the board. And so we're a little weird. And I think that's okay to be a little weird. And we have for a small firm, we have a full suite of probably what you call C-suite level employees, exceptionally talented people who help me run the business being a legal service provider. And then I have my practitioners who are the face and voice and hands and feet and everything of the firm and its brand. So that's what makes us a little weird. And I'm happy to dig down as far as you want me to in any one of those areas.
Right, and we will. Again, reminder, guys, you could just ask questions beneath if you've got questions about growing a firm. If you're at that transition point where you're trying to figure out what to do with staff, especially if you were at that point and then this thing hit. Like, how do you make those decisions about adding staff? What do you do with cash, and how to think through that? So we'll talk through that a bit. I did want to. So just very briefly about the book. In the book, I identified two kinds of solos and firms that they could build. Obviously, there are many other kinds, but these two are sort of the extremes of a spectrum. And one is the expert freelancer. It's somebody who really focuses deep down on a problem. They're teaching, they're writing, they're speaking, they're nerding out. They're in a basement. They're superstar nerds, and they fill in. They take projects as they come. It's more like a consulting firm, that kind of business model, I think, than it is like a VC type entrepreneurial type company. The other kind is what I think you do, which is more audience building. It's more, you're a service engine, you're a solutions engine. You're just trying to find, you've got your people, which for you is mostly geographically defined, right. I think. But you've got your people, and what you care about is your people. And when they come to you with a list of problems, you start asking yourself, could I provide that in a way that is good for them and good for me? Can I do that profitably? Can I do it well? And if I can, I'm going to add that to my suite of things that I offer. So with all that said, I think the thing that I say first, the first hire, and I'm pretty sure you did not hire this role, and so I'm interested in what you did hire for and how it changed. The thing that I identify, if you're going to run that kind of firm, you're going to be the kind of person that just solves things. You can't be the solution all the time, right? Like there's no way for you to be the solution for 10 different practice areas. Please don't do that. And everybody tells me if I'm in a rural area, I have to do that. Talk to Chris, because that's BS. Nope. So for that kind of person, I say you that kind of firm, you got to have 4 competencies. They're design, source, build, and deliver. And very briefly, design has to do with, once somebody says, I want a solution, you say, okay, what does that look like? That's the design function. Source has to do with, once I've defined the steps in this solution, let me find who goes best in these things, because it's not me, right? It's who goes in these different spots. Build has to do with quality control stuff, making sure it's coming out okay. And deliver has to do with the service experience, like what are they feeling while they do it. So I talk about in the book, if I'm a Chris, however many years ago, my first hire would be the person with those 4 skills. That is a project thinker. I call them a legal supply chain manager, but people call them project managers. That's what Patrick Palace calls his, as a projects manager. But just somebody with those kind of design skills and that customer service focus, and they're not delivering substantive legal product, right? They're designing the product. So for you, I'm assuming you never hired a legal supply chain manager because you didn't know what the hell that was. And not a clue. Most people don't. And so, like, how did you solve as you were growing? Was it you doing most of those functions just sort of accidentally? Did you have a project manager type personality? Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And you're articulating it so much better than I ever could have when we started this journey. The desire to have a platform of legal services that we are providing to our communities and our region and our tribe, our people, right. In that context. No, I did not have a fantastic idea of exactly what I needed. I just knew I didn't have the skill set necessary. Sure. And I have a very small window of real talent and skill. So important to recognize that. I'm really good there. Yeah. Outside of that, not so much. And there's so much that goes into running a firm.
some of the first places we looked for was talent and how do we structure our culture inside our firm. And my wife actually joined us very part-time initially. But the first full-time intentional hire into this was my CFO. Because the last math class I had was 1996. And I was failing function statistics and trigonometry when I blew out my knee in high school football. So it got me out of that F. But I am not a math whiz, nor do I have a lot of skill or expertise in how to do finance. I needed someone who understood that because I didn't even understand the basics of how do you cash flow and predict the success of a firm. Right. Because, for us, it was a matter of we were doing well, we were being successful, but I still had bills I was choosing not to pay. I still had things that I was choosing. I didn't know how to do a budget really, really well. And when I brought my CFO in, and I think I said this in the session as well, she spent the first year undoing everything I had done because I had either done it partially right or not right at all. And we had to rebuild. And, I know that there's a lot of different options for people to think about, whether it's an outside third-party hire or contract employers. I had to find somebody local to me because for me, my team has been built around building a concept of who we are as a legal practice, wholly different than everybody that's around us. And so this team has been in a creative process along with me. And so, no, the supply chain, the figuring out how to meet those needs, our very first step that we took was how in the world are we supposed to run a successful business economically?
Well, and I assume because you were probably, when you started, like a lot of people, especially with your wife in tow with you as a resource, I assume you were sort of doing all of these roles yourself.
Yes.
Sort of doing them all poorly just because you've got so many hats, right? It's necessary. Well, necessary might not be the word. It's common when you wear a bunch of hats to be pretty good at all of them, right? If you believe the 10,000 hour rule, which we can debate that, but if you believe the 10,000 hour rule, if you're wearing 20 hats, there's literally not enough hours for you to become great at something. There's just no way. So you were doing the thing up front where you're, sort of stumbling through all these things. I like the idea that money came really early because one of the things that drives me crazy, that I've been railing about against for a while, is this idea that all sole owners are entrepreneurs. I just hate that word because unless it means business owner, it's just not true. And if it means business owner, then just say business owner. Like that's vague to the point of uselessness. An entrepreneur, they think of scale. Scale is so important to an entrepreneur. It's growth. It's risk. It's entering a new market. It's creating a new market. That's not the behavior of somebody who went to law school to, go out and litigate cases and write briefs. And that's just not the same suite of skills. So for you, I sort of like actually that you went money first because you were fitting that entrepreneur definition. You were saying, my function is to put one in and get two out, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm assuming that person then helped you figure out, all right, here's when you should hire different roles, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me step back into something you just said because there was an amazing story that just happened.
Yeah.
I opened the practice with my father. And if anybody looks at the website, you can kind of see our story. He was what in Ohio is called a common pleas court judge for 21 years and a prosecutor before that. And so public service. And I went to law school as a second career after teaching because, we all make poor life decisions. And he and I opened it up together, and we're trying to figure this out. He just won the largest case 3 months ago in our county's history. And we were having a partner meeting the weekend after, and I was bringing up all of these expansion and trying to predict. And we were seeing some strain even before COVID came into the country. So there was some strain. We had to have a 2-day meeting because they were just so long and so much to talk about. The second day he came to me and he says, I love the practice of law. I want to get up and I want to die in front of a jury someday. Yeah. That's what I want to do. He says, I hate running the business. And he says, you're great at this. Yeah. You're better than great. You're good at this. He says, why don't I just give you all of this? He says, and I'll stay and practice. And I backpedaled because I didn't understand what it meant. I thought he was leaving, which would be a huge brain drain for us. But
Right.
he came to that conclusion that you just said. Lawyers are not equipped or trained to be business owners or entrepreneurs in that level. They're equipped to practice.
Right.
They're equipped to solve problems for people in an artistic fashion. But that is just back into that story. His intellectual honesty and emotional intelligence, even at that point in time, led us to a position where it's like, change the face of our firm, hopefully for the better.
Right.
We'll see. Now, you had said, I wanted to put two in, or put one in and get two out.
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely, that was, inarticulate at the time. It was, I want this firm to take care of my family. I don't want to spend my life on this firm, hooking it up to my arm, giving it blood,
Right.
knowing that if I unplug this IV from my arm, it's going to die because it's completely dependent on me. I want to build something that takes care of everybody that's a part of it, that is a self-perpetuating machine. And so, the economics of the understanding how a legal practice works and should work and how we should be investing in the future needs of people was definitely the first choice I was making, because that was my goal, was to create something that was a legacy and not dependent upon my presence in order to be successful. And if I can tell another quick story aside from that.
Yeah.
In 2018 in the fall, due to a very long story that we don't have time to get into, I was having a very emotionally difficult season. Cracks, irrationally getting angry, yelling at staff, which I've never done and haven't done since. And I got my team together and I said, guys, we've got some cracks here starting to show. I left for an entire month. I went out west, traveled by myself. My wife gave me a blessing and kicked me out the door. And I traveled and slept in the back of our SUV and went to the national parks and saw people. I ended up seeing Billy Tarasio out in Arizona at the end of that trip. And, a time to get away. I came back and the firm went on a 5-month record-breaking spree of intakes, matters, just because I left.
Yeah.
The crisis that was interesting that came up after that was, I'm not valuable in the same way I was before.
Sure.
All of a sudden you build this amazing team and they're running and things are going great. And you realize I don't bring value in the same way I used to. I've got to create a whole new paradigm for how I create value for the firm. And so it's a constant growth mechanism. But yeah, every person has been intentionally hired. And since I turned over hiring to my wife, who we've worked together as teachers, we work together in this business. We're really a weird family dynamic. All the time we talk about this firm because we're so invested in it. Our turnover rate since I turned over hiring has dropped to maybe one every other year. Mm. And sometimes that's just situations change and people move on from a business. But our team has such increased loyalty and buy into the culture that we've been able to design a brand and a platform, I love how you're calling it, where people believe in what we're doing. Right. And every time I spun something off from me to somebody who could do it better, it launched the firm forward further because I couldn't.
I'm going to share real quick, and I make reference to this conversation a lot in the book. It was between Brian Clark and Seth Godin, and they were talking about the difference between a solopreneur and a freelancer. And the distinction that Godin said is a freelancer makes stuff and a solopreneur makes decisions, right? And I'm hearing in your story this shift from I don't make stuff anymore. It's my job to make decisions. And wait a minute, that's actually that's a good thing. Like that's a valuable, important thing. You need that role. So I would encourage you guys to go listen to that. I wanted to share, and this is getting, digging into it. I wanted to be practical for people. And so I'm going to share just this screen real quick. Okay, this is intimidating and it's super nerdy. But this is Chris after how long? How long did it take to do this?
We are 10 years old as of February.
So this is Chris's firm right now. Not right now because things are weird with the virus, obviously. But this is the organizational chart of Chris's firm right now. And you can see At the top of each of these blocks is the initials of the person filling that role, but you can see some of what each of them do and what each of them does, and then the connections between them. And Chris was mentioning to me before, the connections are sort of fictional because in practice, everybody's sort of teaming with each other, which I think is right. But there's a default. There's a default in these relationships. And if Chris, if I can remember, these top four roles are all lawyers. And then
on the left-hand side, where it's JS, JNW, ELR, and ICB, that is our ops team. And then the next four, KH, KK, MAK, and TDW, are four partner lawyers, right, with MES being an attorney as well, but supporting them.
Got it. And then obviously you're an attorney, but you're just focusing on the making decisions part. So I share this, guys, so that you can see by the time, for Chris to run the organization that he has, for some reason in law, we always talk about how many lawyers do you have as like some indicator of where your business is at. But really, Chris has as many people on his operations side as he does on the lawyer side.
Yeah.
Which I think is foundation, is really fundamental. So to talk about this, I wanted to talk a little bit about when you hired for each role, why you did, what was the thing that justified it, and I'm looking across this. Where's the money person?
The ICB, that's my CFO.
Okay.
So if you go right down and to the left,
there it is. Got it.
That's Irene. And I will be honest with you, I would put her up against anybody in the nation in understanding law firm finance. She comes from the financial planning sector. She is amazing.
How did you find her?
She was actually with the company we were using to design our retirement plan. So we have a couple local financial advisors. She was with them. She had been with them for some while. She was looking to make a move out of pure sales that she was doing with financial advisors. And her family has its own business, so she's familiar with the small family business atmosphere. And she's incredibly hungry to learn. And so she really just came into this. We went everywhere together that first year. She learned about the business, learned about things. She had honest, hard conversations with me. She had to speak to me in sixth grade language or less about what, and she was the first full-time intentional add to that team.
So were you, and you don't have to be too specific, but where were you revenue-wise? Because at this point, when you make this hire, it's you and your wife part-time, I gather.
Yep.
So
we probably had at that time Ken, Tom, and we had another one or two attorneys at that time as well, a couple support staff. But we were suffering from a significant amount of turnover because I was not paying a good amount of time attention to the culture and who we were.
Got it. So you did have legal staff at this point. So you had scaled somewhat. You've got a couple of attorneys. What were their practice area? Are they all geographically still just as rural as you were, but doing different areas?
Yeah, we cover about 24 counties in eastern, southeastern Ohio. And so they would usually have a geographic focal point where they would be doing it. And being a GP, I know it might make some people's heads fly off, but we have 26 different practice areas, 24 or 26 different practice areas. And so everybody kind of had to be supporting one another as we did it. Now, we also artificially had a boost through the oil and gas boom that happened in eastern Ohio.
Right.
And so that really launched us, and we've tried to use that bubble to launch us into a larger GP practice. But
it's fair to, I think tell me if I'm wrong, it sounds fair to say, as you were adding lawyers, as you were adding legal support staff, on the outside, it looked like growth, it looked like success, but to you, the experience that you were having is you're sort of scaling problems.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, it was only problems, only anxiety. It was constantly decision making and trying to figure out how to better, if we put it in the language that we can talk about right now in 2020 with the firm, how to better service our clients in such a way, that it was efficient, how to have good policies and procedures, which when you talk about the plethora of problems, that's Erica, ELR. She's in there right next to Irene. She in combination with my wife and everybody else on the team, wrote a 120-page procedural manual for how we do things inside White Law Office. How do we track the hourlies so that, something as simple as when you put in your hourly rate, you're not having to review it for a day at the end of the month. You're just approving invoices to go out. So that was our biggest problem is I had this vision for what we could be. I had this mess of things, and yet there was no organization to it. It was just pull on one string and you didn't realize it was pulling on something down the way, which is causing chaos for somebody else. And it was a hot mess. I mean, I was a hot mess. It was trying to create something without the skill set necessary to actually bring it to life.
And really, it's like, I've done this. This is not judgment at all. I would bring people in thinking that they could be self-running machines that was sort of a copy of me, but they weren't better. Barry just commented, he said, I like when you talked about bringing in people who know more than you as opposed to hiring people that you have to teach and train, which can be so draining. And I think that's resonating in what you're talking about right now. It sounds like first you were hiring copies of you that you hope were better at the, whatever. And then you were only later did you say, hey, we need somebody totally different than me. And it sounds like your build then was really hiring for differences.
Absolutely. I mean, if we did figure that out, unfortunately not soon enough, to avoid some chaos, but, it was, I can only train people to my level of mediocrity. That's really all I can take them, to borrow, if I can get too geeky on you, to borrow from Yoda in The Last Jedi, as, their masters, we are that which they grow beyond. But that's only if you have people who really, really want to go and figure it out on their own. And most people that you hire that you have to train don't have the vision to have already gone beyond you in that kind of stuff. And so, what I've always looked for is people who know more about it or demonstrate the ability to go find more about it than I do. And unfortunately, in a rural environment, I don't have a dearth of experts. And so there have been some training. Like Erica came to us. She did not know law firm stuff, but man, does she love policy. Man, she just digs in and
that's so interesting because
eats it.
I feel like I've said over and over again, it's easier to train somebody on the law context and they bring outside skills in than it is to take somebody who knows the law context and teach them skills, especially if what you're doing is hiring for skills that you don't have.
Yeah, I find that cross hires have universally failed for us, from other law firms, simply because, and I don't say it's ego, I say it's lack of creativity. People are so intransigent in what they've learned inside the law that they take on that 100-year-old legal persona of this is who I am and I can't change. It's been universally more difficult to bring somebody from another law firm than it has been to hire somebody who's adept at what they're good at. Like our PR guy, Jordan, who's all the way there on the far left. I mean, he came from the marketing area. He's pursuing with us right now his master's in marketing. He's got that hunger and that attitude and the willingness to learn everything he can about the law. And he's taken us in the 2 years he's been with us from 30 to 35 intakes a month to 80 to 90 intakes a month. And I mean, just by having somebody who knew what they were doing with our PR and marketing.
Was thinking about it, working on it. It's
so much better than I ever did it.
So Nina asked the question that I think is interesting in this. She said, could you provide referrals for financial professionals like Irene that understand law firm operations and finances? I think if I'm getting this from you correctly, Irene didn't, right? Like she does now after doing it, but I'm assuming there was probably in a lot of those walking around conversations, Irene saying to you, are you a moron? Like, why do you guys do it this way? And with you going, well, that's what law firms do. And Irene's like, that's stupid. I'm just imagining this whole conversation.
Yeah, I did. No, that would be true. And I would say honestly, in our journey, I don't know if I could make a referral. I would say this: find somebody who is amazing at planning economically. Somebody who is a financial planner, more than an accountant, more than somebody who's just, a stock trader or anything, somebody who can plan. Because for me, Irene's ability to plan has put us within 2 or 3 points every year of our
Yeah.
budget.
That forecasting that's
Yeah.
allowing you to make decisions about hiring and stuff. And I would say, Nina, there's the book Profit First. This is like money stuff. There's now a Profit First for Lawyers group, and they're doing interesting things. But I think the point here is Chris didn't hire a bookkeeper.
No.
He didn't hire he hired a forecaster who was helping him to make numbers decisions. And so it may be that you'd be better off, going to find somebody part-time. I always recommend hiremymom.com. There are part-time stay-at-home moms that are way ridiculously overqualified. And if what you need to do is use the language that they use, right? So don't go in there and say, I want a bookkeeper, right? That's your language. But if you use the word like financial planner, that's something they use. So, I use the term legal supply chain manager, but when I go hire for that role, I'm hiring for somebody with a project management background because that's a term they use. So just make sure as you're looking for it, I would use hiremymom.com. I think usually they're billing like $35 an hour. Seems to be pretty standard for these roles. Chris, would you... to be able to do this, that function of projecting and looking into your money, I mean, they've got to have a lot of access to money.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Does that make you more nervous to do virtual? Like, do you want to have a full-time employee on this? Or do you think you could trust somebody?
This is a very personal to me question and may not be a systemically good question for a lot of practitioners. Right. For me, it is vital to have these team members vested in my company. It is vital that they are in and part of it. Now, being as backwards as it is in Ohio that non-lawyers cannot own a part of the firm, I want them in all intents and purposes to feel a sense of ownership over their areas. And so for me, bringing them in, vesting them inside the firm, I have conversations with these people because they understand intimately our culture, our values, our cases that I could never have with somebody that I was hiring and seeing once every other week.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and again, I'm going to keep adding this caveat. Chris was not building a consultancy kind of law firm. He was building a scaling law firm. So when you guys look at this org chart and you're like, holy crap, how do I even justify getting all of these roles? That's the business he was building. So he started first with identifying the kind of business he wanted to build, which I would point out, if his dad were running this firm, it would not look like this at all.
No.
It would look totally differently. So if his dad decided to go build a firm, it wouldn't look like this. And you may be more like Chris's dad and you want to build the, kind of expertise-driven firm, and that's fine. Give yourself permission to not build like this. I would also remind everybody that you can ask questions, make comments below. Let us know, as you've thought about scaling, especially in this moment, how you're thinking about going about that, where you might hire. Chris, I wanted to talk about other roles as well. So you mentioned, and I'm curious about the order of this, you got a certain amount of, so you hired legal people.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back, as an aside, would you have done that first? Because it sounds like you made the mistake of duplicating yourself.
Right.
But by duplicating yourself, you got the revenue so that you could then not duplicate yourself. Would you have done it differently?
I don't know if logistically I could have done it differently, because you need producers in order to create the pool that you can hire these experts from. Right. And so I would have said this. I would have, in the first year of being open, I would have spent an ungodly amount of time trying to figure out exactly who we were as a firm.
Right.
I would have spent more time than it seems reasonable to have nailed down who we are culturally, our brand, our vision, our agenda. I would have nailed all of that to the wall so that it wasn't completely just inside of me, because we're subjective, fickle people. We change, and we don't, if we don't set up that objective of who we are as an organization, it can get fuzzy and it can move. And I think that was a single greatest problem I had, is that as the strain increased for me, who we are became fuzzier and fuzzier. And I made some poor decisions out of not having a clear focus.
Were
And so
you
I think,
were you still a revenue generator at that time?
yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I was doing everything you see in the top four people,
Right.
plus carrying 150 cases at a time.
Right.
So it was stupid.
But common. I mean, not
Yeah,
unusual. And I mean, there really is the question, and I don't know the answer. I mean, I've got my feelings about it, but having not been in the position where I've done it, it's easy for me to guess at this. I don't know if that phase is necessary or not, right? Like, do you have to go through the period where you're stretched like crazy trying to figure out how to grow? There's a book, I think it's called Company of One. And there are books like this where they're talking about right sizing your business. I talked with a friend, Todd Smith, last night, who he started growing, adding lawyers he started building, and then he was like, I don't like this. And
yeah.
he scaled way back, and now he's a solo again with some support because he's building more of a consultancy type of firm. You may get into this and realize, I don't like this. I don't want to keep doing this.
Right.
And I don't know if you have to go through this to make that decision, right?
I don't know either. I just know that I did. I know
Yeah.
that for me, being as thick and slow as I am sometimes,
You've got to be hit upside the head.
you just got you got to drown a couple times and be brought back to life before you realize, oh, I shouldn't be carrying that in that deep water. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I wish I could. When I look at it, I'm looking at this chart and I'm looking at all these people,
Yeah.
and they are such an amazing group. And I'm obviously their biggest cheerleader.
Yeah.
And these people, they regularly embody who we are to our clients and to our staff and to each other. I mean, but we've invested in them.
Right.
We invest a tremendous amount. One of the things I think about as I look at this is my ops team and my attorneys every year in the fall, they have to go out and do a mentoring with somebody else in their section with somebody completely outside of the area.
Right.
Somebody that they need to find a mentor, they need to find a leadership group, they need to find something to invest in to expand their abilities. But I'm like, go spend days doing that with other people. This lost revenue, lost time direct, but it has profited us so much. Right. In the sense of validation for choices we're making, which we don't otherwise get. We just are kind of trusting our gut into new innovations and new ideas. That's the thing, is you just can't throw people at it. You've got to keep investing in them. You've got to keep, you see on their MBTI. And I know there's a lot of feelings about, different personality profiling and test. We don't use it to profile people, but we spend 3-4 times a year using that as a communication tool to foster discussion inside of our team and help them talk about things, have transparent discussions. It's an unusual quarterly meeting if nobody cries. So, just that they've come to such a point that they can talk about these things. I mean, we had a coffee break last week, and one of the moms who's got the kids at home, and we're all home as she's trying to teach. And I said, how are you doing? And in front of all of these people, she broke down and she said, it's just so hard.
Yeah.
And then she came back up out of that. But that's the kind of trust they have because they're constantly investing and working with each other.
As long as it's not always you crying at those meetings, that's probably...
I swallow my tears.
Yeah. But so timeline-wise, so you get revenue by getting some of these profit center type workers, people who are turning legal product, right? So you get revenue, and then you get somebody to manage that revenue to try to turn it into more productive dollars that you can reinvest. What were you hiring after that? Was it marketing? You're trying to get more revenue in? Was it more that build competency where it's people doing checklists and making sure quality is there? Like what was your next hire after you started figuring out how to create money from your money?
So Erica, she actually started with us as an admin. She was answering phones, but she was developing such a knowledge base of our systems and how they work that we kept just moving her further up and further into that. So it's kind of a little blurry line because she kind of migrated into basically our database manager and executive assistant. She keeps track of our Clio and our box, that we do everything on. She makes sure the policies and procedures are being followed for our intakes. And so that was really the next full-time person into the mix. Now, my wife was still along with us. As our daughters were aging up, she was getting more and more involved until she came full-time this last year, completely full-time. But, Erica and that policy and procedure, because even when Irene came in and she was working with me on the economics of it, it was still a hot mess of everybody just kind of doing as they thought best, right, which is universally a horrible way to run a unified platform. Right. So that was really the next thing for us was, how are we going to do what we're going to do?
So you get revenue, how to get money from your money, operations, right? Yep. Sort of writ large. We're starting to do policies. And I'm assuming that you and Erica, are you the one creating the policies? Is she creating them? Like, how are those policies initiated?
God, no, nobody wants me to create policies. Nobody, because I told you before we got started, in MBTI terms, I'm an INTP. That means the entire world is fluid. I will never close a door due to the fact that there are so many opportunities that I possibly could pursue. I am the worst person on a day-to-day basis of trying to run something. Yeah. What I did, though, is I fostered conversations where we identified issues. And some of those were emotionally tied to people early on. You get tied to the way you do things. And there was some real upheaval sometimes when we'd start to do something. But as we went along and as they began to trust each other more, those conversations, we just had one over email this morning. What is working with everybody being home? Right. And 12 emails came in. Hey, this is working really well. This is not. Okay, with what's not, how can we address that and move it forward? But I fostered the conversations whereby these people could then start saying, how are we going to do it? And I just held the mirror up and said, we want to be the best at this. How can we do it the best? I will also say this. Ken Hostetler, who's right down to the right on the sheet from me, he's been with me 7 years this May. He has a mind for processes, and he will tear open the machine to tighten the littlest screw just to make sure it's working correctly and then put it all back together. And so having him as one of my attorneys who's also immensely invested in that, I wish I could say I knew that when I hired him. But as we dove into the policy and procedure area, he has been a voice that has just been nothing but helping us try and find that happen.
But you're sort of you're crowdsourcing the design of the policies and procedures, which makes a lot of sense. And that, I can't remember what job I had that we talked about this a lot. I feel like it might have been Blockbuster or something, but the manager would always talk about train your replacement. Like whatever job that you have, you've got to create this culture of you're documenting everything that you're doing because one day you're going to be in a better position and you're going to have somebody doing these things. So stop taking things for granted, train your replacement. Okay, so then we get into policies. We're sort of cleaning up the delivery mechanisms. At what point do you start, that last competency that I talked about, which is deliver, which is what nerds call the value chain. It's not the get the widgets made. It's what's the experience of buying the widget? What's the experience of unboxing the widget, of improving sort of the stuff around the legal work? When did you start thinking about that stuff?
It would be, there had been conversations, but not competency.
Right.
And when we brought Jordan in 2.25 years ago.
I'm sorry, Jordan's the PR guy?
Jordan's the PR guy all the way on the far left. Okay. When we brought him in 2.25 years ago, the conversation really started to take off. First time we proposed doing NPS scores, right. I thought somebody was going to shoot me. The attorneys having a conversation about clients, reviewing them, while they conceptually are like, wow, we want to have a great experience, we don't want them telling us what we did right and wrong.
Right.
That being said, NPS, we sit at about a 78 or 80 right now, with an industry in the 35 range. I mean, it has been, that conversation started in earnest with competency when Jordan joined us. And so he took over not just the brand and how we look and the website and the social media platforms. But his agenda has been, how can you remove as many hurdles as possible between a person who needs legal services and our attorneys? And so, and then the question being then, how can they have such an amazing experience with us that they're going to go out and tell other people? Because we all know, universally, no matter how good your website is, no matter how much your social media is, the number one source of referrals for a legal service provider or a law firm are relationships. And so those people having such an amazing experience and telling people, I know in the last 2 weeks, I've had friends on Facebook tag me on people who are asking for legal services in this area, say, hey, Chris, do you guys do this? Right out there in the open. Not because they saw us, our website, not because they're friends on Facebook. They're relational to me. And so helping capture the people so they can make the easiest decision possible from where they are to who we are and what we can do for them. And then when they engage us, that entire experience being as best as possible so that when they're done, we're the first person they think about when somebody else has a need. And that could be a simple will, that could be a divorce, which is hard to keep people happy in. It could be but that's Jordan really charged ahead with that.
Well, and I wanted to ask you, because when you're doing, so we talked a bit about the design, again, getting to the 4 competencies: design, source, build, and deliver. We talked about design, how you guys are creating different projects. We talked about the build part, the quality control, the way you're, creating these policies and procedures, and a bit about the deliver stuff with Jordan and how you're making sure they're having a good experience. On the sourcing thing, I'm interested in somebody with a general practice. Because again, by definition, you can't be good at 100 things. There's just no way. And so for you to deliver high quality legal service, you've got to have some kind of specialization, both in the firm and for things that your firm doesn't know, how you connect with people outside. And I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm guessing there's probably a process whereby if you have to keep relying on somebody else outside the firm, eventually you as the owner are going, maybe this is a service we should provide ourselves. Absolutely. And we should bring inside some competencies. So how are you distributing work? If you get a case that's of a type that nobody in the firm has ever dealt with, like how are you divvying that stuff up? Who's making those decisions?
We have, as lawyers, one of the greatest things, and this was told to me in my first internship, is they teach us how to learn. That is one thing law school does, is it teaches us how to learn. And so what we do is we work with our individual attorneys to say, what do you want to learn? What do you really want to dig down into? Now, we're going to educate you on the whole breadth of what we can do. And the great thing about Tom, 21 years on a small community bench where he traveled and visited other courts and was visiting judge for a lot of courts. Heck, he even trained the Ukrainian Supreme Court when they became a democracy on how to do case flow. He had this experience from murder trials all the way down to DR and domestic and property line issues and anything. So there's this wide range that you usually go to Tom and he's like, I once heard something like this. And you're like, that can't be right. And you go out and find out he is. So we have a wealth of information that's nested in us that is not, again, that is unique, not to every firm. But when we look at, let's take Mariah. Mariah's down there. She's a support attorney, the MES. She's a support attorney. Our conversation with her has been, what are you really passionate about? And what is a need in our market that matches that? And nonprofits. We have a huge amount of nonprofits in our area, starting, functioning, looking for advice, guidance. We've gotten connected with a group that serves 500 churches that they're constantly looking for somebody to bounce out. She really wants to dig down into that. Now, she knows how to do a deed. She knows how to record that deed. She knows how to do a life planning packet. She knows all of this breadth of stuff. But because of what she's learning, we'll develop an entire competency that we can distribute across the 24 counties that we serve right now. Now, I want to put something into perspective too. Our core counties that we serve, our 3 primary counties, we have 60,000 people. That's it. We have 60,000 people that we built this team on. And that means that population does control some, but controls less than people might think. Because all of these different areas where Ken is doing business and Kate's doing more GP and oil and gas and Matt's doing DR and criminal and Tom's doing all of our complex up against big oil and gas companies that bring 12 lawyers to the table against our one little guy. That competency level allows us, though, to capture inside of that network of 60,000 people a larger percentage of the legal needs.
Right.
And so that's where at GP for us, we're actually seeing that, yes, COVID-19 is causing problems for us, like everybody. It is an inescapable problem. But we're actually seeing, I had 11 intakes last week. That's pretty on par for average, very depending on what it was, because of a general practice's nature and all of these amazingly skilled people that I have. They're able to capture a larger percentage of the legal needs in the marketplace simply because we do more.
I feel the need to scream again the caveat that Chris is building a particular kind of firm.
That's right.
I mean, really, if you've got one of your lawyers who's even like the business lawyer, which is such a broad category as to, I don't know if the word expert ever qualifies. Again, expert is as vague a word as entrepreneur is. But even that degree of specialization, and still remaining broad, couldn't really work unless the whole rest of the organization existed, right? Like if like your dad, because he was a judge, presumably knows a lot about procedure stuff, right?
Yeah.
And procedure in a lot of different contexts. Just to get the procedure right on a new kind of case would be really difficult if you didn't have the different kinds of support there. So I hope that you guys watching this are not thinking, I personally have to have all this in my head.
No.
That's a terrible business model. Please don't do that. Which, if you're going to be soul, like you're really trying to focus, then I really do think you need to focus on a problem and become that kind of expert consultancy type, because you just can't do all this stuff by yourself. But I did want to ask you, let's say somebody comes at you with, I need to deal with, I'm transporting nuclear waste and I have to figure out how to comply with the blah, blah, blah. Something that you've never done before and not even remotely close to having done before. How do you make the decision as to whether we take this kind of case? Do we refer it out? Do we go ahead and take it and we bring in outside competencies? Do we try to solve it ourselves? If you get something truly new, what are you doing with that?
If it is completely outside of our scope, for instance, let's avoid nuclear waste and go towards intellectual property.
Okay.
We have a firm up in Canton, which is actually not an hour from us. There's a patent office. Canton, Ohio has one of the few of them out there, patent offices. We have a firm up there that we call and we say, hey, one of our guys designed something. He'd like to talk to you. For us, though, that happens so infrequently that we wouldn't pull that in-house, but we have a great relationship with them. And the thing is, they don't do anything else. They're not going to be poaching our client to do their general business work or their contract negotiation or anything like that. Right. And so what we have done is we've built a very robust network of great people. I have a friend over in Western Ohio. She does HR and advises employers and employees on human resources issues, did for the Columbus Blue Jackets hockey team. And, if there's ever something that raises to the level of our small business customers needing something, we call Mindy. We say, hey, Mindy, we need to bring you in on this. We collaborate. There's a lot of mentality that there is a plenty to collaborate on. And so there's a generosity and generosity mindset with sharing, especially inside the firm. Ken may be working with a client who junior got pulled over on a DUI. Ken calls Matt and says, hey, I need you to come help my client out on this DUI. Ken doesn't do anything with that client. He doesn't, do anything with that case, rather. He doesn't do anything with that case. And Matt takes over. And there's the generosity. But that took a tremendous amount of effort in making sure compensation was reflective of that. Right. Origination versus production versus, contribution to the firm. All of these things that you have to take into account. But, when it comes down to it, even with 24, 26 areas, we can't do everything. Right. And so we have a network of people out there that we trust to take care of our clients really, really well. That being said, we didn't know oil and gas as well as we knew 10 years ago. And we're up against, multi-billion-dollar companies on oil and gas issues that are highly complex that we're trying to change the law in Ohio right now. So we do have the capability to tackle those new things and tackle those unique and novel things. But again, that's largely because of Tom.
Yeah, and probably, I always make the point, if you go out to your audience, and again, Chris is building around an audience, this being this rural type. Normally, I would not say a geography is a type, right? So if you're in Houston and you're like, I serve Houston, that is not narrow enough. That's not a type. There are all kinds of types. Rural is a type.
Yep.
It just is. There's consistent kinds of issues that are faced. The legal issues are fairly common across. The personality types are pretty common. The ways they communicate are pretty common. Their politics are pretty common. The way, their social networks are pretty similar. So normally I would say don't do geography, but this makes sense. Chris is doing a thing where he says to that audience, what do you want? Either directly or through what they keep asking. And then I'm gathering that you have a way of making decisions where you say, okay, no, right? Just because your audience told you I need to move nuclear waste, that does not create a moral obligation for you to move nuclear waste, especially if you can't do it at a profit. If somebody keeps saying to you, I want this thing, and you can't figure out how to deliver it profitably, you have no moral obligation to go do that thing. I would point out real quick, Barry added the comment, when you do a variety of areas, practice areas, the cycles, even what's going on now, will have some practice areas busy, meaning whenever you have a business, you're trying to spread risk across the portfolio. Right. We talked about this with Ed Kless. So, if you are a super nerd and you're super focused on a problem, there are times that those problems are going to be more needed than other times. You go make rain when that problem is really poignant, and then you carry that over into the other times. When you're an audience-focused business, you pivot to that audience's needs, right? And that's what Barry is talking about, is this, because you're doing what you're doing, Chris, where you're able to pivot through these different practice areas, maybe personal injury stuff for cars is down right now, but bankruptcies are up, right? You're able to pivot to that
absolutely
across the portfolio.
I mean, and we're all anticipating DR is going to go up. Once people are able to get out of their houses and stop having to be with their spouses that they didn't really like being with in the first place, we'll pivot. If I could put this in a very rural term, we rotate our fields.
Yeah.
Our crop fields are not growing the same thing all the time to the same intensity. And so we rotate our fields to keep them viable. And so responding to the needs of the market, just because we have 24 practice areas doesn't mean that all of them are active at any given point in time. But the powder's dry, and you're able to launch in that direction if needs be.
Your rotating the fields thing just made me remember a video when I was in high school where it was this South American tribe that was growing 3 crops together that fed each other. It was beans and potatoes and something else. Anyway, the point is, I'm assuming when you're making the decision about what crops to add, you're trying to figure out, are they synergistic, right? They can't be so far apart that you can't have some of the beans aren't feeding the potatoes and the potatoes aren't feeding the green bit, whatever the heck it was.
Absolutely.
But I just took that analogy way too far, but I was just thinking about
I love it.
You're not so far afield, I guess is my point. Just because your geographic area says, I want this thing, unless it's a thing that you've got competency for and you've got structure for. You might think about building the competency and structure for later if you keep seeing it come up and you can deliver it profitably. But you don't have to say yes to everything, even in a general practice. That would be a terrible idea.
We joke that our practice really comes down to 3 areas: dirt, dead people, and money. Real estate, life planning, probate, and moving money around, for businesses and ensuring they get it, cash flow. We have some outliers in our litigation, which is, DR and those kinds of things. But our practice really revolves around the things that are important to our rural community, which is real estate, life planning, probate, being ready for transfer of generational wealth. and helping them become as successful as possible. Which I want to give a shout out to something you said yesterday in one of the videos about being the host. This platform that we've built would not be successful if we weren't intentionally out there trying to be the source of information.
Right.
People. We're about ready to do our 8th small business conference, and that we started 8 years ago with 40 people. We are anticipating 400 small business owners and entrepreneurs will be there this year to join with us. We bring in speakers that are all local, nobody nationally named, nobody even statewide named, are all local people to us who have real resources that can help them in a tangible way. But it is something that there's so much value in an individual platform that you're building as a consultant or something like what I'm building, in taking the bull by the horns and being the host, because you become the source. Right. If you have to rely on somebody else's platform all the time to get your voice out, it'll be their platform people think of first before you. If you build your own, that's who they're going to think of.
Yeah, I early in the book, before dividing these two kinds of areas, I talk about social capital a lot, because in both cases, you're building on social capital. Whichever kind of firm you're building, it requires connection with people. How you organize them, the way, the tasks that they're doing, it's different. But in both cases, you're trying to build connections. You're trying to build that social capital. So I appreciate that, Chris. I know people who are growing firms are going to have a lot of questions for you. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Hands down, best ways through email still. I am on Facebook. I am on Twitter, Instagram. I think I have a couple pictures on there. But hands down, still best way to get a hold of us is via email. It's thewhitelawoffice.com is the website, and it's just my initials up front, which you can see there at the top of the org chart, which is CMW, at thewhitelawoffice.com. Shoot me that. I'll get you my cell phone number. We can exchange thoughts and ideas. I really want to be very clear, as I hope it has been. I am stumbling through this sometimes still. I think this model is going to work for us, and I think it's primed us for a growth because my ops team is in place, and I can start adding, supplementary practitioners to this in new geographic areas. But this could fail. Yeah. This could still fail simply due to the fact that I don't have a lot of comparisons out there when I look around to help me guide through how to make these decisions. But I'm happy to share our experience, good, bad, and ugly.
Well, I appreciate that, and I would remind you guys that you can continue to post comments and questions below if you're trying to grow a firm. Chris can continue to participate with that in the group, and so can I, and anybody else who wants to jump into the conversation. Make sure that you guys check on the left-hand side, the events tab on the left. You can see the other sessions like this that are coming up. We're doing one with John Strohmeyer tonight about designing for service. So make sure that you mark that you're going to the events you're interested in. It will send you notifications about those events. And we will see you guys at the next event. Thank you again, Chris.
Hey, that was awesome. Thank you so much.